Okay, I assume that most of everyone watching knows about Star Trek The Next Generation, right? Like, even if you didn't really watch the show, you're at least somewhat familiar with characters like Jean-Luc Picard, Data, Worf, even Wesley Crusher.
Yes, from 1987 to 1994 and 4 movies afterwards, the crew of the Enterprise D worked their way through popular culture, and while they never achieved the popularity of their original series predecessors, they still developed a loyal following with a sizable amount of fans. Though I really do have to question this one guy mentioning his favorite episode.
My favorite, Code of Honor.
Really? Code of Honor? The episode where a planet filled entirely with black people abduct Tasha Yar so she can become the sex slave of the chief? Really?
Anyway, if you recall the last time we covered Star Trek comics on this show, you would have noted that the comic license spent much of the 80s and 90s bouncing between DC and Marvel, and the same would hold true for Star Trek The Next Generation comics. The first TNG comics were produced by DC in 1988, and then they would move to Marvel in 1996, before finally moving to DC subsidiary Wildstorm Comics in 1999 and running until 2002. Then in 2006, the Star Trek license would move to IDW Publishing, which launched the TNG miniseries called The Space Between. IDW would actually eschew an ongoing series for a few years, instead choosing to release a series of miniseries afterwards.
Now, that can be kind of tricky, as one miniseries could be another Measure of a Man, Best of Both Worlds, or The Most Toys, while another one could wind up being like that weird episode where the guy from The Rocketeer showed up and everyone thought it was really cool, but really the whole thing was just kind of lame. Anyway, today we're looking at a 5-issue miniseries from 2009. This is Star Trek The Next Generation, Ghosts.
The Enterprise arrives at the planet of Alios 4 to answer a distress call from a satellite over the nation of Dorosh. The funny thing is, the vessel actually belongs to the nation of Juliet, which has been at war with Dorosh for the past 11 years. Still, the Juletians believe that they are worthy of joining the Federation, having achieved something akin to warp technology via a special ore mined from the planetary core. Further troubling Picard, the Julian ambassador, named Kajal, seems to be more concerned with selling Juliet to the Federation rather than trying to save any injured people on board the vessel.
Added to all of that, Captain Picard must be rather perturbed by the fact that Commander Riker seems to be slowly turning into modern-day Will Wheaton.
Riker, Dr. Crusher, and Geordi LaForge beam over to the satellite to find almost no structural damage. They do, however, find one Julutian with part of his body missing, claiming that he's killed his fellow crew members. The Julutian, named Ul Everrood, is beamed directly to sickbay, while Geordi stays behind to investigate, and the Enterprise is hailed by Kalkash, leader of the Doroshians. Kalkash explains that the Julutians have killed the ruling Elder Consul via what they believe to be a weapon on the satellite. To that end, Picard calls for a meeting on a neutral site called the Tower to hash all of this out. Unfortunately, Kajal just keeps pushing Juliet for Federation membership while all the Doroshians really want to do is fight. Back on the Enterprise, Crusher and Deanna Troi take notice of Ul Everrood's wounds. The hole in his torso and severed limbs should have blood spilling out of them, but nothing like that appears to be happening. In fact, the hole in his torso just looks more like a window. Added to that, Ul claims to be seeing ghosts that are haranguing him and seeking retribution for his actions, one of whom appears to be Captain Picard.
Maybe it's the Picard from yesterday's Enterprise.
Geordi returns to the Enterprise and notices that Ul Everrood is emitting a similar energy signature to a device on the satellite, which was powered by the Zoor energy mined from Alios 4's planetary core. He begins working with the Enterprise's computers to adjust the field and hopefully limit Ul's visions. As this plays out, Picard returns to his office. He claims it's about the Julutians and Doroshians constantly arguing, but Troi knows that he's actually upset about Ul calling him a ghost. To that end, Picard dispatches Data and Worf to investigate the two civilizations. Kalkas explains to Worf what happened to the previous elders, all of whom vanished, leaving only him in charge. He then orders his daughter Warwick to take Worf to the elder Doroshian Volmok in order to learn more about the Doroshian history and their culture. Worf can't help but take notice that Warwick, as many of the other Doroshians, seem to be very tired of this decade-plus conflict. But before anything else can happen, Kalkas mysteriously vanishes, leaving only a smoldering pair of boots behind. Warwick accuses the Federation of being behind this, and Worf tries to fight off any attack, but is soon overwhelmed and taken hostage.
Wow, Worf failed in battle and got his butt kicked. I'm so shocked.
Meanwhile, Riker catches Kajal's top advisor Diron leading a crew to the satellite to retrieve the Zoor energy generator in a manner that seems to suggest they're covering something up. Back in sickbay, Picard prepares to speak with Ul Everrood again after Geordi's adjustments. Ul explains that the ghosts are giving him numbers, but he can't quite decipher them. Also, Kalkas has recently popped up amongst them. It's then that Warwick contacts the Enterprise with a demand. Turn over the Julusian ambassador and their satellite, or Worf will be executed. Picard refuses to negotiate with Warwick as he calls Kajal and Diron and orders them on board the Enterprise. The Julusian leaders are willing to remove the satellite until they hear they also have to turn themselves over. Picard attempts to bring Warwick down and reasonably negotiate with her, though he really just uses this as a communication to Worf in order to restore his wounded Klingon honor. As this plays out, Kajal and Diron talk with Ol Everrood and appear to try to get him to keep quiet about something. Meanwhile, Data returns with some interesting facts about Alios 4. It appears that Zoor energy isn't really necessary for their possible warp drives. They run off dilithium like everyone else does. Which of course means that the ore chamber on the Julusian satellite is in fact weapon.
Wow, that's almost as shocking as Worf being taken hostage. Also, it turns out that the main researcher into Zoor energy was none other than Ol Everrood's wife, Kier, who mysteriously vanished during an experiment 11 years prior.
Ol explains that Kier vanished during a test of Zoor energy which began circling the planet, which, as Data points out, orbits around the atmosphere rather than the other way around. Every so often, that band of Zoor energy comes into contact with someone and kills them. It's then that very band of Zoor energy in question pops up on the Enterprise's scanners. Added to that, the Doroshians have launched an array of weapons at the satellite. The Enterprise moves to intercept the missiles, which don't do much damage. However, when the band of Zoor energy comes into contact with the ship, Captain Picard mysteriously vanishes. However, Picard is not dead, but rather he's just trapped in a large white void.
Ooh, wait, I've seen this episode before. Q was going to show up and make Picard relive a day in college where he was either stabbed through the heart during a bar fight or had a clunky one-night stand with a longtime female friend.
Back on the Enterprise, an irate Riker orders the Julusians to stay put while he talks with Ol. Right now, they have no choice but to adjust Geordi's sensors and bring the ghosts back to see if they can possibly bring back Captain Picard. In the void, Picard bumps into several people, including Calcus, along with several Doroshian and Julusian elders. More importantly, they run into Kier Everrood, who's willing to work with everyone to possibly get them all back. Back on the Enterprise, Riker is informed by Geordi and Data that the generator that's on board the satellite can actually attract the band of Zoor energy like a magnet. In response, Riker beams Diron and several other Julusians on board the satellite over to the Enterprise brig so that they can destroy the weapon, but not before using it to track the Zoor energy band's energy signature. Back in the void, Picard and the others manage to locate the severed limbs and chunk of torso from Ol Everrood and try to use that to relay the coordinates of the dimension so that they can possibly be transported back home. Meanwhile, Riker tries to reason with Warwick again, but it's to little avail. She's pleased about the satellite being destroyed, but until he turns over the Julusians, Worf will still be decapitated at sundown.
Okay, I should point out here that the main reason why the Enterprise can't just beam Worf back is because his communicator was smashed, and it turns out the Doroshians have some type of antenna relay that's causing an interference with the transporter signal.
The Enterprise beams Data down to Alios 4 just outside Doroshian territory to locate the antenna that's transmitting the interference, so he can then locate Worf and hopefully bring him back. Worf, meanwhile, is doing his part by slipping free of his bonds and fighting off his guards. Meanwhile, Kira begins relaying the dimensional coordinates to Ol via the Julusian form of Morse code, which Ol in turn relays to Geordi. Unfortunately, there's a catch as one of the numbers is 11, a number that the Enterprise computer just doesn't seem to recognize. Added to that, the field dampening is causing more and more of Ol's body to slowly slip away. Not to mention, Picard is having troubles as the elders on both sides just keep arguing and insulting each other. Kira seems to be the only one playing fair as she's internally depressed by the fact that all of her research has been weaponized. Picard points out that sometimes the best intentions can have the worst consequences, and if everyone is going to get back home, they need to learn to work together and get their heads out of their collective you-know-whats. On the bright side, Geordi has managed to finally figure out what the problem with the coordinates is. Julusians have 6 digits on each hand, so he adjusts the Enterprise computer and finally opens up a transport beam home.
The funny thing is, the fact that the Elosians have 6 fingers on each hand didn't pop up until just now. In fact, there are earlier points in the story that stated both the Julusians and the Doroshians only had 5 fingers on each hand.
On Alios 4, Data takes out the interference relay and then begins following the bodies of unconscious Doroshian guards back to Worf. However, before they can beam back to the Enterprise, the two are confronted by Warwick. Thankfully, it's then that Calcus comes over the communicator to talk his daughter down and order her to surrender. In the void, Picard prepares to leave with Kier, but she's hesitant. She knows that Ol's lost too much of his body. To put it simply, he'll die if she crosses over. So she'll decide to stay behind and let him slip over into the new dimension so they can finally be reunited. She thanks Picard for his help as he heads on through the transporter beam. Worf returns to the Enterprise, and it's decided to table any talk of Julician/Alios 4 ever joining the Federation until everyone decides to finally just get along with each other and stop being dicks. On the plus side, both Juliet and Daraj are willing to begin peace negotiations, and the idea of using Zoor energy is being abandoned.
And that concludes our look at Star Trek The Next Generation, Ghosts. How was it? Well, on the plus side, outside of that little slip-up with Will Riker earlier, I do think the artwork does a pretty decent job of capturing the actors' likenesses. It seems rather spot on, as does the characterization. Everyone seems right and in the right order and everything of that nature. And, to be honest, this does kind of feel like a TNG episode. Unfortunately, it feels more like one of those clunky early season TNG episodes from the first couple of years, where maybe the idea sounded good on paper, but in the execution it just kind of came across as clunky, exposition heavy, and, well, kinda dull. I mean, the pacing in this just isn't particularly good. I honestly had to fight off sleep a few times while trying to read this, and it just didn't hold me at all very well. And also, I'm going to have to say, the Zoor energy thing is still kind of confusing. It took me a few read-throughs to try and figure out what was going on there. So, yeah, it didn't quite work for me in that sense. I mean, and I don't know if I could really recommend this to TNG fans. I mean, if you were, like I said, there are certain things you could draw from this that would certainly feel familiar from that show, but on the other end, like I said, this is really boring and clunky, so, you know, I don't know if I think I would only recommend this to the most desperate of TNG fans. It's not terrible, but it's not good by any stretch of the imagination. I'm going to give Star Trek The Next Generation Ghosts a C. And with that, let's see what we'll be doing next time on the Random Trade Review.
Remember, you can help support my channel at patreon.com/sleepytimeforcatproductions. There, you can request a trade to be put in the randomizer, aka the cardboard box. Also, remember, like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring that notification bell.
My favorite, Code of Honor.
Seriously, dude, Code of Honor? That's just messed up, man.